let us suppose, just for the sake of argument, that all of you sitting here right now are feeling fairly all right. I mean, you're not in hospital. You don't have the screaming memes. You have a sense, you probably had dinner and are feeling pretty good. But you know that you feel that you're fairly good because in the background of your minds, very far off in the background of your minds, you've got the sensation of something absolutely ghastly that simply mustn't happen.
Wow.
And so against that, which is not happening, and which doesn't necessarily have to happen, but by comparison with that, you feel pretty all right.
Whoa.
And that...
boy, I did that this morning.
Yeah?
I was like up in my head the whole morning, or for like part of the morning, on some dumb stuff. And then I was like, yes, exactly. That was part of it. We played in a tournament of round net yesterday. This isn't from that, but we lost to this team who plays in a way that we think is just so boring. Like, they're just really good servers. So you never actually get to play the game. They just hit the ball really hard. And I was just like so frustrated with that. And then that combined with like other things I'm frustrated about. And then I sat still and I was like, I need to like center myself here. And I said all the things to be like grateful for. But it's all things like health, you know, the place that I'm living, like a good home, the friends I'm around, which is all just like me being thankful for it because I don't have the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Being thankful for the good things, not necessarily the...
Which is already making the good things.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. A practice that I've been trying to implement into my life, which I feel like very directly relates to that, is just saying my own version of thank you whenever anything happens. Like, whenever I think about it, it's like, yes, I say thank you. It's like, that was something I did yesterday. Like, yesterday after the tournament, I got like some version of like heat stroke or something, and I had to throw up, and I had a migraine. I slept for like 14 hours, and I was like in a rough spot. But it was like at one point I was just like aware for a moment, and I was like, oh, thank you. Like, it was just like, even like, especially then.
Yeah.
Because even in that moment, the whole time I felt sick, I was really present. Not necessarily meaning that there needs to be a good thing from it, but there always can be something beneficial drawn from anything.
Yeah.
So, at least from my experience. So it was like, yeah, I mean, in some ways I had a good time yesterday.
And just being present in general, you said this one time, but like that a life was already worth living if there was one moment of fulfillment.
Yes.
You know, like, and one moment of fulfillment, I'm learning more and more, is just one moment of presence. Because it's like then you're full of something.
Yeah.
And yeah, so like even that in that moment, oh, it's crazy. It's crazy.
absolutely ghastly thing that mustn't happen at all is Kali. And therefore, at once, we begin to wonder whether the presence of this Kali is not in a way very beneficent. I mean, how would you know that things were good unless there was something that wasn't good at all? Now I'm not putting this forward as a final position. I'm only putting it forward as a variation, as a way of beginning to look at a problem and getting our minds out of their normal ruts. She's black. Well, she, first of all feminine, represents what is called philosophically the negative principle. Now, of course, people who are women in our culture today and believe in women's lib don't like to be associated with the negative, because the negative has acquired very bad connotations. We say accentuate the positive. Well, that's a purely male chauvinistic attitude. how would you know that you were outstanding? Unless, by contrast, there was something instanding. You cannot appreciate the convex without the concave. You cannot appreciate the firm without the yielding. And therefore, the so-called negativity of the feminine principle is obviously life-giving and very important. But we live in a culture which doesn't notice it. You see a painting, a drawing of a bird, and you don't notice the white paper underneath it. You see a printed book, and you think that what is important is the printing, and the page doesn't matter. And yet, if you reconsider the whole thing, how could there be visible printing without the page underlying it? What is called substance, that which stands underneath, underneath, stands. To be substantial is to be underlying, to be the support, to be the foundation of the world. And of course, this is the great function of the feminine, to be the substance. And therefore, the feminine is represented by space, which is of course black at night. But were it not for black and empty space, there would be no possibility whatsoever of seeing the stars. Stars shine out of space, and astronomers, very high-powered astronomers, are beginning to realize that stars are a function of space. Now that's difficult for our common sense, because we think that space is simply inert nothingness. But we don't realize that space is completely basic to everything. It's like your consciousness. Nobody can imagine what consciousness is. It's the most elusive, whatever it is, that there is at all. Because it's the background of everything else that we know. Therefore, we don't really pay much attention to it. We pay attention to the things within the field of consciousness, to the outlines, to the objects, to the so-called things that are in the field of vision, the sounds that are in the field of hearing, and so forth. But
golly. That
Collie?
Kali. Oh, Kali. That brings me to the thing that you were saying earlier
What was I saying?
The quote from Rumi, who said, like, beyond truth and falsehood, there's a field. And it's like, beyond concept and concept, there's a field.
Mm-hmm.
You know, beyond like
Field of feeling.
even beyond feeling and other feeling, there's a field that is somehow has those things on top of it.
And what's great is Rumi doesn't say anything about the field. He said there's a field. I'll meet you
Yeah.
there. You'll know when you're there. You won't say, am I at that field? You'll know when you're there. And that's another cool thing. It's like I don't know if you've ever had these experiences, but like I've had certain experiences where I'm like, is this enlightenment? Like you just for a moment. And then asking the question means no. Asking the question means absolutely not. This is not enlightenment.
I'm a poser. That's crazy. And then that we don't pay attention to the field because you're so busy paying attention to the things in the field.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or that the field that comes from the field, like the fruits that are growing from the soil. Yeah. You're so paying attention to that because that's all what's useful to you. Like all this stuff around us is all so useful. It's like what we need to keep this living thing going. But if you want to experience the depth of course depth isn't even the right word, then I feel like in some ways you just need to let go of what's useful to me, what's not useful to me.
Mm.
And he was talking about space and consciousness, but that also applies to time. Like, I was listening to another one of his lectures, and he quoted, I want to say Hippocrates, but I don't think it's Hippocrates. And they said, I know what time is, but when you ask me, I don't. Like, we know what it is in our own, like, day-to-day sense, but we can't describe it.
Oh, man. I'm realizing that the purpose of thinking about these things is to break the mind.
Yeah. And then to leave it in shambles.
Leave it in shambles.
Yeah. Kali comes and stomps on it.
This is a thing we do on the channel where like something where you're like, this doesn't make sense. And you're like, it doesn't make sense. My mind. Yes. And you just like take off your mind, set it aside. Haha, I'm good now.
I understand. It is all clear.
Yeah, it's like I don't understand. Oh.
Nice.
What it is that embraces all that, we don't pay much attention to it. We can't even think about it. It's like trying to look at your head. You know, you try to look at your head, and what do you find? You don't even find a black blob in the middle of things. You just don't find anything. And yet that is that out of which you see, just as space is that out of which the stars shine.
He's good with
There's
words.
something very queer about all this. That which you can't put your finger on, that which always escapes you, that which is completely elusive, the blank, seems to be absolutely necessary for there to be anything whatsoever. Now let's take this further.
Oh boy. Why not?
Kali also is the principle of death, because she carries a scimitar in one hand and a severed head in the other. Death. This is tremendously important to think about. We put it off. Death is swept under the carpet in our culture. In the hospital, they try to keep you alive as long as possible in utter desperation. They won't tell you that you're going to die. They, when their relatives have to be informed that it's a hopeless case, they say, don't tell this to the patient. And all the relatives come around with hollow grins and say, well, you'll be all right in about a month, and then we'll go and have a holiday somewhere and sit by the sea and listen to the birds and whatnot. And the dying person knows that this is mockery. Well, of course, we've made death howl with all kinds of ghouls. We've invented dreadful afterlives. I mean, the Christian version of heaven is as abominable as the Christian version of hell. I mean, nobody wants to be in church forever. Children are absolutely horrified when they hear these hymns which say, prostrate before thy throne to lie and gaze on thee. They can't imagine what this imagery means. I mean, in a very subtle theological way, I could wangle that statement around to make it extremely profound.
Wangle.
I mean, to be prostrate at once and to gaze on the other hand, see, is a coincidentia oppositorum, a coincidence of opposites, which is very, very deep. But to a child, it is a crick in the neck. And that's the sort of imagery we're brought up with. So the idea of what might happen after death, well, you're going to be faced with your judge. The one who knows all about you. This is Big Papa. who knows you were a naughty boy and a very naughty girl, especially girl, from the beginning of things. He's going to look right through to the core of your inauthentic existence. And what kind of heebie-jeebies may come up. Or you may believe in reincarnation. And you think that your next life will be the rewards and the punishments for what you've done in this life. And you know you've got away with murder in this life. And the most awful things are going to happen next time around. So you look upon death as a catastrophe. Then there are other people who say, well, when you're dead, you're dead. Just nothing going to happen at all. So what you got to worry about? Well, we don't quite like that idea. Because it spooks us. You know, what's it be like to die? To go to sleep and never wake up? Well, a lot of things it's not going to be like. It's not going to be like being buried alive. It's not going to be like being in the darkness forever. I tell you what, it's going to be like as if you never had existed at all. Not only you, but everything else as well. That just there was never anything, and there's no one to regret it. And there's no problem. Well, think about that for a while. It's kind of a...
This whole death tangent...
Sounds kind of lovely.
Yeah, I've been on my own death tangent recently.
Oh, Eli death tangent.
Having to do with COVID. Because...
Eli death tangent alert!
This might not be a crazy tangent, but I'm thinking about... I'm trying to... because with COVID, people are dying, and there's this thing that's spreading internationally, and it's part of people's death and like the end of that, and that is like such a heavy thing. And I've been thinking about the way that we are doing anything we can to like minimize the death. Mm-hmm. But then there's the part of me that is like grounded in all of nature is just recycling itself. Also when a certain population of animals gets too big, they get a disease and die off, and nature just does this naturally. And it's like, so I have all these thoughts too of like, how can we as humans be so ignorant right now to think like, with all the destruction we're causing on this planet, that we're not going to die from it, and that there isn't going to be mass death because of it. So then from those two different lenses, one's like very sensitive to culture, the other is really kind of anti-culture, and they're both sitting there, and I'm like, what would I actually do as a leader in this situation? Because that's so, so difficult, and I'm just playing with these thoughts. Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest things that keeps coming to me is that the response and a very unsustainable way of living is pretending that living can just go on forever. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how could we get back to this idea of, while you're alive, having the most fulfilling life possible, to the point where if death comes up to you, you're like, I'm ready. Whatever's next, I feel like this, can come to an end, can be let go of.
Yeah.
And how could you set up a culture that isn't ignorant to the fact that people are dying and that there's things that we can do to prevent death, but is also at the same time holding the other things and is being like, yeah, how do we just create a way of life that is okay with death? And not just okay with it, but embraces it as the essential part of life. Mm-hmm. It's like, so just some things that have been moving around.
Mm-hmm. Lovely.
This also makes me think of my own personal plight with the idea of death and the afterlife. And I've already told them this, I think, but there's this quote from a Kurzgesagt video. If you haven't seen Kurzgesagt, check them out on YouTube. And it's like, it's talking about death and like, what will you feel like after it? And it says that just as you don't remember life before you were born, you won't remember life after you've died. So it's kind of like, that really comforted me in my own fear about death. Because it's like, all right, it's not like you're potentially even going to be conscious. So why worry about it? And I guess he's kind of saying the same thing.
I think I would say that, though. How do you know?
Yeah.
I don't. But I feel like it's possible that I won't have a semblance of, with whatever comes after, I won't have much of a semblance of what came before. Because right now, if something came before this life for me, then I don't really know it. I'm not super in tune with it. Mm-hmm. So it's possible that the same thing will happen and that I just won't carry the knowledge of that. Like, I think just the knowledge or the consciousness of eternity, infinity, is too much for my mind to bear. But knowing that maybe I won't have that knowledge is comforting.
Maybe.
We'll see. Stay tuned.
Find out after this break. Jeez.
Weird feeling you get when you really think about that. You really imagine it. Just to stop altogether. And you can't even call it stop, because you can't have stop without start.
Damn.
And there wasn't any start. There's just no thing. Well, then when you come to think of it, that's the way it was before you were born. I mean, if you go back in memory, as far as you can go, you get to the same place as you go forward in your anticipation of the future as to what it's going to be like to be dead. Then you get these funny ideas that this blankness is the necessary counterpart of what we call being. Now, we all think we're alive, don't we? I mean, we're really here? That there is something called existence? You know, the existentialists, Dasein, thrownness, you know, here we are. But how could you be experiencing that as a reality unless you had once been dead?
Oh boy.
What gives us any ghost of a notion that we're here, except by contrast with the fact that we once weren't? And later on won't be. But this thing is a cycle, like positive and negative poles in electricity. So this then is the value of the symbolism of she is black. She, the womb principle, the receptive, the instanding, the void, and the dark. And so that is to come into the presence of the God who has no image. Behind the Father image, behind the Mother image, behind the image of light inaccessible, and behind the image of profound and abysmal darkness, there's something else which we can't conceive at all. Dionysius the Areopagite called it the luminous darkness. Nagarjuna called it Shunyata, the void. Shankara called it Brahman, that which can only, of which nothing at all can be said. Neti neti, beyond all conception whatsoever. And you see, that is not atheism in the formal sense of the word. This is a profoundly religious attitude, because what it corresponds to practically is an attitude to life of total trust, of letting go. When we form images of God, they are all really exhibitions of our lack of faith.
Damn.
Something to hold on to, something to grasp. How firm a foundation, what lies underneath us, the rock of ages, or whatever, ein feste Burg. But when we don't grasp, we have the attitude of faith. If you let go of all the idols, you will of course discover that what this unknown is, which is the foundation of the universe, is precisely you. It's not the you think you are. No, it's not your opinion of yourself. It's not your idea or image of yourself. It's not the chronic sense of muscular strain, which we usually call I. You can't grasp it. Of course not. Why would you need to? Supposing you could, what would you do with it? And who would do what with it? You can never get at it. So there's that profound central mystery. And the attitude of faith is to stop chasing it. Stop grabbing it. Because if that happens, the most amazing things follow. But all these ideas of the spiritual, the godly, as this attitude of must, and we have been laid down the laws which we are bound to follow, all this jazz, is not the only way of being religious and of relating to the ineffable mystery that underlies ourselves and the world.
That was it?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. That went by kind of quick.
Yeah, that end portion got me good.
Me too. That's the field that
Mm.
Rumi's talking about.
Mm.
That's what Shiva was pointing to. It's in his name. Shiva, that's that which is not. Yeah.
10 out of 10. As always.
Raving review of Alan Watts.
Mm.
Damn. I think a lot of points came into my mind throughout that whole last part,
Mm-hmm.
but none of them are present currently.
Wow.
So,
Where'd they go?
Nothingness.
oh, I actually love the way that he calls the I, or he's like the I, this constant muscular strain we feel.
Oh.
You know, like the only reason that you think that you exist as this thing is because you feel something that's like holding you here, like the back of your neck or your body, and it's like, what would happen if all those things released? You know, you'd be somewhere else, or not. You'd be right here.
Where could you go?
Yeah, I don't know.
Alright.
All right, folks. Anything else?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
This has been fun.
High five.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was dope. What are the reviews of Britt?
I was just gonna say that.
Good performance, bad performance. Should she come back? Should she not come back?
Yeah.
Comment down below.
Nice. All right, folks. Thank you for being here. Much love.
Much love.
Okay, much love.